Good afternoon. I thought Carolyn Stevens might be here this afternoon. She didn't make, well, I can understand that. So I have her to thank for getting involved in this. This is one of many cemeteries that we've had the pleasure of mapping and getting into the old cemetery adventures. I'm not quite sure how it all started, but about 25 years ago we had embarked on a cemetery adventure up in Camargo, if you're familiar with Camargo, Illinois, just north of here. And a colleague of ours from Southern Illinois University, who's a geophysicist, got us involved in some subsurface exploration there. We were looking for some lost Confederate gold. And so a lot of the work that we do in cemeteries, sometimes it's somewhat qualitative in the sense of historical preservation, inventories for headstones, but we've done a lot of strange things in cemeteries. Some of you may have seen the exhibit we've got in the North Wing here, the Heron Massacre. That involved a forensics initiative. We were looking for the lost massacre victims of the 1922 Heron Massacre. So we've dabbled in a lot of cemetery type activities, and it's not always just mapping what's on the surface. And so for us, oftentimes it's what's below the surface that's more interesting. And we find oftentimes there's some pretty interesting things going on beneath the surface. So to that effect, I've got a quote here from Bill Lovecamp. Dr. Lovecamp eloquently stated, cemeteries constitute libraries of stone. And so one of the things that we do is we do cemetery inventories, right? So we map the headstones. We do this with a good deal of precision. And it's not just the what and where is it part of the cemetery mapping initiative that's of interest, but we throw in the temporal component too. In other words, there's a time when these folks were buried, right? And so we take into consideration one, the spatial aspect of where these headstones are. That is where they are within the cemetery, but also when someone was interred there. And we can take this data and we can model and map it in ways that I think you're going to find quite interesting. So they do constitute libraries of stone. Cemeteries, of course, are a reflection of communities, in some cases, such as this one, that are no longer here. And so, to that effect, they become proxy information. Real quick on integrative geography. I like to put this in all my presentations. What we do over in geology geography is oftentimes not only integrative, but interdisciplinary. So as a physical geographer, as a geologist, I like to engage my students in all of my research. And as such, we oftentimes engage with folks like Dr. Lovecamp over in sociology anthropology, our geophysicist friends down in Southern Illinois in the Department of Geology, archaeologists, anthropologists. So it becomes a multidisciplinary endeavor. And that, of course, is, in terms of what we do here at EIU, it engages our students and gives them a more broadened and integrative kind of an experience outside of the classroom. And so this is certainly a integrative and interdisciplinary subject. Two of the courses that I involved in this particular mapping endeavor, my GPS, Global Positioning Systems, Mapping the Modern Way course, and my Introduction to GIS. If you're not familiar with GIS, GIS stands for Geographic Information System, or is what we scientists like to call Geographic Information Science. And so it's a way that we can model real-world phenomena, such as a cemetery, objects on the surface of the earth, and bring them into the digital realm. And if we take that information, this spatial information, and we tie information to that data, there's all kinds of different patterns. There's visualizations that we can produce in this mapping software, and you'll see some of that here. All right, so 4 different phases, at least for mapping this cemetery. We got started in November, I believe, November 1st, if memory serves, mapping the Parker Pioneer Burial Ground. We're not completely finished, and so I'm going to take you through some of the mapping initiatives that we have, whether they're complete or not. We do have some grant funds that are supporting this endeavor. We've got a faculty partnership grant, sociology, anthropology. Dr. Bill Lovecamp is involved with that with a colleague of ours from Southern Illinois University, and by and large most of our work is being funded through that, aside from we have a general interest in doing this, so a lot of it's gratis too. And of course by engaging the students in the field, it's a learning opportunity for them. So phase 1 is the preliminary data acquisition. How do we go about mapping a cemetery? And in this particular cemetery, it's not a public cemetery owned by, say, a city, so it's a little bit different in its approach, or in our approach in terms of how we gather the data. There's often a conceptual design to a cemetery. So if you go up to, say, Roselawn Mound or some of the other public cemeteries we have, they have sections and blocks and lots and spaces, and everything is kind of organized, and they've got these conceptual designs on the wall. Conceptual is one thing, but reality is a whole nother thing. And oftentimes the placement or internment of people in a cemetery isn't quite what you would expect to match on the conceptual design. And somehow we have to account for that in mapping and modeling in our system. And so here's a few of the ways that we do that. The phase 1 initiatives for data acquisition are first and foremost horizontal and vertical control. I'm going to give you a lot of technical stuff here, and I'll try and keep it as non-technical as possible. Anything that we do, whether it's mapping topography, the lay of the land, so to speak, if it's mapping the headstones, if it's subsurface imaging, if we're looking beneath the substrate, what lies beneath the headstones and whatnot, we want all that information to tie together. So much like the system that you're using to draw the headstones, Autodesk AutoCAD probably, what we want to do is any layers of geographic information that we get or that we map, we want them all to align properly. More importantly, we don't want to just go out there and map and measure and collect data in what we call an arbitrary system, because someone who might come along 100 years from now may want to know where that exact object that I mapped a month ago is in the real world, and they may not be able to find that. So what we do is we tie everything into a real world coordinate system, and we do it within pretty good accuracies. In part of it's for historical preservation. You had mentioned, there he is. If headstones get, and it's very common, headstones get knocked over, sometimes they get stolen, storms sometimes take out parts of cemeteries and whatnot, and we want to have an accurate record of exactly where that stone is. And so if someone's going to come back and navigate to that, maybe you've heard of GPS or handheld GPS, geocaching, that kind of thing, we want people to go back to the exact spot and be able to locate that stone, among other reasons. So for us, the horizontal and vertical control is very high precision. We go out and you can see these two purple triangles here. This is what we call a baseline. And I used a method called static GPS, or static global positioning systems. And believe it or not, I can set this instrument up on a point, an unknown point, and I can let this instrument run for several hours, and I collect data from satellites. It's called ephemeris. And I can take this ephemeris data and resolve a position anywhere on the surface of the Earth to within millimeters. And so when I do this, it gives me an accurate, let's call it a latitude and longitude for now, an accurate X and a Y position on these two monuments here. What that allows me to do is come back with another instrument and use those 2 points as a station set up for an instrument and a back site to tie into a grid. In other words, I can't use this global positioning systems technology. It's a line of sight technology. We can't use it under heavy canopy. And so trying to monument headstones beneath heavy canopy it just doesn't work. You don't get good readings. And so we have to come by and consider this type of a mapping environment using what we call a multimodal approach. In other words, several different types of instrumentation. So my high precision GPS, you'll notice it's out here in the field. Why? I've got a clear view to the sky. Very, very high accuracy point here, very, very high resolution at this point. I set an instrument here. You've all seen these. They're called total stations. You see IDOT using them. They're on the highway. One person's holding a reflective prism. They're walking there. They're taking readings. Someone else is running the gun. My high-resolution GPS is allowing me to take my total station and transfer a known point into the wood, so to speak, into the cemetery. And from there, I move my instrument under the canopy, and I can take as many measurements as I want. And so oftentimes when we engage in these endeavors, we have several different types of instrumentation. The precision GPS is great, but it's not going to work under the canopy here. That's for starters. Now, why be this precise? You're mapping headstones. Do you need this, this? Well, again, it's about tying all these layers of information together in my mapping system. So one day we go out, we set the control, I put that into my mapping system, which basically you're looking at here. There's aerial photogrammetry. This is exactly where those points were mapped relative to the rest of the world. I come in and we map the headstones, I map the topography, right? And all of those layers, even if I do them years apart, all lay precisely on top of one another. Topography. So why map the lay of the land, so to speak, for the cemetery? A number of reasons. First of all, it allows me to produce three-dimensional models of the cemetery. So while a two-dimensional wall map is nice, actually visualizing the headstones as three-dimensional objects on a three-dimensional surface of what it really looks like is interesting. And you can rotate these models, and we can look at the distribution of headstones across the landscape, so to speak. A fairly small cemetery, but there's some interesting patterns nonetheless. Microtopography. So what I mean by that is taking very precise measurements on the vertical to look for subtle depressions in the landscape. So we talked about unmarked graves, or you had mentioned unmarked graves. And in this particular situation where you do have thick short grass and whatnot, you can't see those subtle surface depressions. But if you map it with a good deal of precision, right, and then we use these computer models to generate these three-dimensional surface models, and you get to see those subtle surface depressions of potentially where unmarked graves would be. So microtopography is important. We're going to see later that it's important for subsurface geophysical exploration. We're not working on a flat surface. We're working on something like this, and as you stated, it is on a moraine. And so we want to know what the landscape is changing when we run our instruments across it. Headstone inventory. So this is an ongoing survey. Sean Vester of Coles County started this. We're collaborating on it. These folks have the genealogical information that's on the headstone and whatnot, the epitaph, the names, the dates of birth and death, and ultimately we'll tie our data together with them. And that's going to be important because generating a map of where headstones are is one thing, but tying the information to those headstones allows us to do some pretty cool stuff with it. And I'll show you that in some upcoming slides. It's the underlying information that goes along with that spatial data that makes it so powerful in terms of visualizing it using a geographic information system. So it's part historical preservation, it's for modeling. We take photographs of them, archival purposes, right? You may have been on Find a Grave and you pop the headstone up. Well, we've got the condition of it now. Maybe there's some archival photos, I don't know. And it becomes kind of a data bank of cemetery information or headstone information. And of course, we're using our total station methodologies and sometimes GPS to map those. Aerial photogrammetry. Michael Babcock at CATS was nice enough to come out and use his unmanned aerial aircraft. He's got a DJI Phantom Vision 2 Plus quadcopter. And part of the mapping initiative is to have a good base map. good photogrammetry underneath it. So you see this photogrammetry here, this is actually from Coles County. But as you zoom in, it starts becoming pixelated. So we want some really good high-resolution photogrammetry. How do you acquire it nowadays? Modern technology. So rather than depending on the county's 6-inch resolution photogrammetry, we fly this drone over the cemetery and we take our own photogrammetry. And so that was part of the initiative as well. All right, quick picture. This is what static GPS looks like. I've got this GPS antenna, and it's collecting all the satellite ephemeris from the constellation. And there's a survey monument on the ground here. And if I'm doing something called rapid static, I'm working for maybe 3 to 4 hours of data collection. And I could take that and I can process it with the National Geodetic Survey, and that gives me that really, really precise measurement. This is not Parker Cemetery, by the way. This is Heron. Yeah, yeah. But it was a good photo of it, and I had been working down there with some students, so I figured I'd show you it. But that's what the static GPS setup looks like. Here's kind of a collage of the only picture that's not Parker is this here. Some more static work. Michael Babcock here preparing his quadcopter for flight. It turned out it was too windy, and so he couldn't stabilize it. But we tested it out at Roselawn, and he could go a distance horizontally and vertically 750 feet. Yeah, Bill was there with me. Really cool stuff. And we could zoom in the camera and zoom out. And these are pictures of my students working. I've got some a student there on the periphery of the cemetery. So rather than just map the cemetery itself, we want to go outside of it. We want a little overlap, right? So that when we produce a 3D model of it, we've got that the cemetery and then some. And so that's what the GPS instrument's doing out there. So we're mapping topography with 2 instruments. A GPS in open areas, and then using the total station under the canopy where GPS is ineffective, multimodal. Ali here running our total station, a group of students running another total station. This is the survey rod. Neil here, or Lon here, is holding the reflective prism in front of a headstone. And all of this activity with this total station business here, this is tied to that same grid that I originally established using the GPS points, the 2 points. So to that effect, everything that we're doing is within those accuracies. And it ends up being within centimeters, which is good enough for headstone mapping. And then, of course, some of the stones that we've taken pictures of that are going to be linked ultimately to the headstone points. That brings me into phase 2, some of the mapping and analyses methods. What do we do with the data once we collect it? Well, it depends on what our client wants us to do with it. In this instance, it's part historical preservation. We're going to automate some of this data, put it online, of course, with permission. We're interested in taking it a step further. So when I talked to Carolyn, I said, yeah, okay, we can map the cemetery for you because we do that, but can I have a look underneath the ground as well? And so, you know, the students, as much fun as it is to engage in the GPS and the total station technologies, the really cool stuff is looking what's down below. And that's something that's pending, but I'll take you through some of the methods. All right, so very generally speaking, this business of making maps in GIS is going to be, by and large, qualitative or quantitative. So the qualitative type mapping is going to be, what is it and where is it at, right? So a new and accurate map of the Parker Pioneer Burial Ground, right? Here's a headstone, here's a headstone, here's a headstone, who's buried there. It's interactive. On our map, on the digital realm, we can click on a headstone and it might pop up a picture. We could click on a headstone and it might populate some drop-down list of first name, middle, last name, date of burial, and I've got some, I don't have some. We tried to link to our online services from here, but for some reason I can't get outside the library, but anyway. So qualitative mapping in terms of what is it and where is it at, historical preservation, and of course the genealogical associations. Good thing I checked my spelling on that. One of the things we can do is it's one thing just to kind of walk through the cemetery and say, here's so-and-so, here's so-and-so, here's the date of death. It's a whole nother thing to visualize it on a map. And then you start to see familial associations, you start to map the temporal component, which we often ignore in mapping, when things happened, and distributions of death and things like that. Quantitative mapping, that gets into the realm of what I was just mentioning, spatiotemporal, spatio meaning in three-dimensional space. Where is it at? Temporal meaning, of course, over time. So a lot of the things that we map are things that change over time but have a place in space. Temporal animations. If you looked at any of the information on the, not to digress from the Parker Cemetery, but the Heron Cemetery, temporal animations were one of the means with which we were able to discover the location of where those men were buried in 1922. It's temporal in nature. 1922 is a year relative to all the other years people were interred. So there's patterns in the data. In other words, there's 1900s here, 1910s here, 1920s maybe here, 1930s. There's going to be some coincidence and some patterns in the data. And you're going to see that in the Parker Cemetery too once we link all that data. We can do investigative and forensic type research. Look at human behavior. So most cemeteries that are public, you have a sexton, right? A caretaker for the cemetery, and like university professors, they tend to have long tenure. Pete up here at Rosalind's been there for 40 years. When he's selling lots, or if he's working in the potter's field or the free ground, there's a rhyme and a reason to the placement of internments, and we can model that. And so indirectly, where a sexton has gone in his tenure can be directly modeled in the system by mapping the headstones during his tenure or her tenure, right? Things like that. So here's a few samples of what we've done so far. This is a color relief map that shows changes in elevation. And I don't have a legend on there, but it's a hot to cold rendering. The bluer colors are lower in elevation, and the red are higher. So what you see there is kind of a mounding up towards this area. Here we've got the fence line on here, and all these little points, which total, I believe, about 1,200 points, are spot elevations. It's where a student walked and stopped and took a reading. It's the X, Y, and the Z of the business. And so this is the micro topography within the cemetery. I've got it there, I think, at a half, maybe a quarter-foot resolution. We can change that resolution so that we can see those subtle surface depressions if we zoomed into this. The next map I've got is kind of a zoom out of that, and you can see the slope. There's a kind of a swale here. There's a dam that someone built here. Do we know anything about that? So there's this natural drainage way through here, and then someone built this dam across it.
Originally there was a road that came in from the south.
Oh, there you go.
Into the cemetery.
So that was not a dam intentionally. So this is a roadway to get into to gain access to the cemetery.
Maybe across through there we'll try to raise the grounds up.
Right, right. So it all comes out in the topography, and again, this is going to help us with the geophysics. And of course, if I've got that in here, no, I don't. I thought I had my 3D model in here. Apparently, I don't. Anyway, we could take this, and rather than looking at it in 2 dimensions, we can rotate it and look at it in 3 dimensions. And when we have you can see the trees on there. And if I have the headstone layer on, we can pull those out in 3D too, and then kind of model it in 3 dimensions as well. All right, I thought this was kind of this is not the Anna. This is in Anna, Illinois. It's an example of what we intend on doing similar to the Parker Pioneer Cemetery. Campground Cemetery in Anna. We were engaging in some research. This is purportedly an area where they stopped some Cherokee along the route for the Trail of Tears. And so we went into the cemetery to look we mapped the cemetery. We did a lot of geophysical exploration in an attempt to find buried Cherokee. Anyway, the end result, or part of the end result in providing them with the services, is looking at simple familial associations and distribution. And so here it's again a qualitative type of a map, but the Civia family is all in blue, and I've got unknown in gray, and Heilmann's in purple. But this is the power behind GIS in terms of its visualization, right? So like I said, it's one thing just to kind of walk around and say someone's here, someone's here, someone's here. It's a whole other thing to be able to visualize it on a mapping screen. And so this is a very simple map, but it shows the familial associations between families. I've added a layer of information here. You see these dashed lines? Now we're starting to pull out the temporal component of the data. So each one of these points is spatial in nature in that it exists in the real world in geographic space. The temporal component is, well, it could be a number of things. In this case, on this map, it's when that person was interred. And so what I've generated here using those points is a continuous surface map of death. So these contours here, or these ISO lines, ISO meaning same, you've seen these before. If you watch the Weather Channel, sometimes it's temperature or precipitation or barometric pressure, right? Those isobars and isotherms. ISO lines of death. Why? I'm looking for an explicit period of time to find when these, or a potential location of where these Cherokee are buried. Relative to the rest of the population in the cemetery, that pattern might just stick out if I've got enough data here to find out, or to pull out that particular date range, so to speak. It kind of narrows it down where we can look. So that's what these are, is these are contours, call them contours, they're lines of death. The easier way to visualize that might be by throwing some color into that, whereby the older dates are in blue. Now I've got a continuous surface map, much like you see on the Weather Channel with temperature or precipitation. The blues are older, 1838, 1841, 1854. You're going up here and you're into the 60s, 1860s, 1870s, right? So it's a means with which we can visualize the temporal component of death across the whole of the cemetery. And you see all these patterns kind of evolve, but it really stands out. So if I'm looking for a particular period of time, these types of visualizations aid in that type of research. All right, just another side example that was related to the heron. This is half of a 25-acre tract of their cemetery. Same thing, it's the temporal distribution. And if you go from the earliest dates in 1905 is when this cemetery was conceptualized to present, you can see that, you can't see it in the map, but this is the top of a hill where my hand is here. And people had a preference, naturally, to be buried on top of the hill, and they kind of spill off of it, so to speak. And so it makes perfect sense that if you look at the choropleth here going from cold to hot, younger or earlier to later, that you can see that in the patterning. I mentioned earlier that some of the data can be used to investigate the behavior of sextons over time, and I'll be brief because I don't want to detract from our Parker theme. This is the Potter's Field in the Heron City Cemetery with that same type of mapping. All of this orange and yellow you'll see is at the tail end of this person's tenure here, Mr. Craven's. This is indicative in our research of overburials in this entire area. It doesn't belong there. This should be in this area. It should be blue. So sometimes these patterns raise red flags in terms of investigative studies. I highly doubt we'll have anything like that in the Parker Cemetery, but the distribution of interments there will be interesting nonetheless. Another use of our technology. All right, phase 2, subsurface exploratory methods. Mapping headstones is fun, but seeing what's beneath them is even more fun, especially if you can do it in a non-invasive manner. So 25 years ago when we first started in that cemetery in Camargo, for whatever reason, because I don't think we really seek these projects out, they just kind of come about, but we've done a lot of them since. Our colleague at Southern Illinois University, Harvey Henson, in the Department of Geology, has done a lot of work, and he's going to work on this cemetery with us as soon as we get a break in the weather. And there's largely non-invasive or minimally invasive and sometimes invasive type techniques. So the non-invasive geospatial methods, I'm going to remove the technical aspect out of these, but 4 main types of subsurface exploration that we engage in. One is GPR, you may have heard of that, ground penetrating radar. EMI, or electromagnetic induction, is kind of a glorified, think of it as a large metal detector. Cesium vapor magnetometry, that's a cool one, right? Sounds complex. And then there's also, I don't have it up there, vertical magnetometry as well. But anyway, we're going to use our faculty partnership grant to engage in this one. We're going to run some EMI. So remember the control that we started off with by setting the accurate control? We've got these instruments that you're going to, well, for the EMI, there's different types. This one's kind of it looks like a giant ski. I think I have some pictures of it. And we're going to walk that through the cemetery, and we're going to walk this way, then we're going to turn around, and we're going to walk this way. And part of the problem is you got to stop and go around all the headstones, right? And that's problematic in an instrument that doesn't record location by itself. And so oftentimes we'll fit our geophysical instrumentation as necessary with precision GPS or another method to keep track of where it is, so that in instances like the campground cemetery or Parker, where you have a lot of headstones, you can maneuver around them. You're capturing data, right? You've got this sensor, and it's sending signals out, and it's reading and capturing data beneath the substrate. But you don't really know where it's at unless you're capturing locational information. And oftentimes when you run these instruments, you start at point A, and we might put a traffic cone down, and we might sight another cone and walk exactly on that line for that other cone. Then we turn it around, we move the cones over a meter, we go the other way. And that keeps it on these nice linear tracks so that we can model it in the processing software. Well, you can't always walk a straight line when you're doing these sometimes. And so rather than use the cone method, so to speak, we invoke some other kind of measuring technology to keep track of where we're going with that instrument. Non-invasive, minimally invasive, probing, right? Tile probe. If you're looking for wood boxes or concrete vaults, you could use that. Divining rods. I'll save that for last. Witching. We've worked with a lot of people. Haint. Have you heard of haint? We have a lot of people, well, we'll save it for the end. Minimally invasive, though. So probing, coring. We've got a straight flight 1-inch core. We can go down about 6 feet. And so as a geologist, I can look at what the substrate looks like and look for changes in the soil horizon, look for non-in situ soils, so something that's been disturbed, buried soil horizons. As you approach a wood box, you'll often find these what we call grave halos. And if I have some time, I don't know what time is it, but if we have some time, I'll explain it. But where are we at?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. I better speed it up. So minimally invasive methods. Blading, sometimes we'll come in with a small cat, and you'll push the surface if there's no headstones. And the way those clays react to a flat blade, if it's natural soils or if it's an in situ strata, they blade real smooth. But if it's been dug, even if it's 80, 90, 100 years old, it'll peel back a little bit, and you'll see these nice square outlines of where graves are. So that's kind of a blading method. We use that down in a Strawn cemetery. We've looked for lost cemeteries. Down there in Tilden, they decided to throw all the headstones in a ravine to get an extra half acre of corn. We came in and located it for them. And then I say invasive. It doesn't necessarily have to be invasive. It's a strong word, invasive. We can go down into the substrate and look at things without necessarily disturbing them, but invasive nonetheless. All right, I'll spare the explanation on those. This is the EMI back in my long hair days. That's the ski, and the cones, right, going back and forth. So I did this for about 4 hours, only to realize that after you can't have anything metallic on you. And I left my wedding band on though, and it, yeah, redo it. Anyway. All right, so just a few pictures of those methods. Here's a geoprobe. We're doing something called resistivity here. This is a noggin cart. It's ground penetrating radar, and you can see we fixed it with some, this is a nylon cutting board from Walmart with some PVC. You want to keep everything non-metallic. And I've got a GPS antenna mounted on that, so I'm collecting ephemeris. That's giving me the position of the cart. And as a backup, I've got a second pole here, which you can see the reflective prism at the top. And in the, is this a laser pointer? Right, this thing here is a robotic total station. So you see Harvey pushing the cart and you can barely see the antenna. But the robotic total station it's an unmanned instrument, and it's just tracking this cart. So I've got two measurements. I've got a total station measurement and the GPS tracking where this cart is going, because he's got to push it and he's got to go like this around the headstones. We get back and process the information in the office. We put it in our mapping software, the GIS, and we see where this cart's gone. And that way we can use the information from that particular instrument and process it based on the exact location of where it was. A little bit of output. This is EMI on a ridge in Colorado outside of Cortez on an archaeology site, but you can see where it's revealed some patterns in terms of these depressions, which are archaeological structures called kivas. There's some other profiles we can take, and we can model the data. These are vertical cesium and EMI models all stacked on top of one another. I take them to the Beckman Institute in Champaign, and we make plaster cast kind of models that we can separate and look at. We throw in the topography, so we've got three-dimensional topography on top of it. Electromagnetic induction. This is what the Parker work will look like. No interpretation on that. The upper right is ground penetrating radar. This is what a standard readout would look like, and then the hyperbole up here that we've marked is where there's differences in the densities of materials beneath the substrate and indicative of potential graves. Not always perfect. Data distribution methods. So once all this is done, how do you disseminate the data? So we can use paper maps. We've got digital maps, right? Let's see what else we've got. We've got an online interface, which unfortunately I can't, for whatever reason, I can't get outside the library. But ultimately, after we map all this and we come together, because it's a collaborative effort, we bring in the genealogical information. We invariably link that to the headstones. We can put it on an online interface so that if we wanted it to be, it could be private, it could be public. It becomes a data bank for Parker information, right? This could be linked to, do you have a Parker family something page or something like that? Or
There's a whole site about Parkers, but it's all Parkers.
yeah, so you could link this to that, to the map, and this is what it looks like without it going live. The other part of the problem is we're in the middle of renewing our license for this software. So some of my other cemeteries are working, but Parker unfortunately is not. Hence why there's nothing on my map here. But it's a web-based interface. So forget all the technical stuff, forget the GIS stuff, and how many people have the software? None of you. What do we all use? The internet. So why not make it freely and openly accessible to whoever wants to look at it? And so this would have the aerial photogrammetry, it could have the topography. You would click on a headstone, it would pop up the information related to that particular person interred there, and that's the direction we're going now. So we've accomplished the topography, the planimetrics, which are the features that are out in the cemetery, which I didn't mention is also important for geophysics. We want to know where the fence lines are, certainly where the headstones are, because that's going to offer some interference in terms of reflections and things like that. Where the trees are, sometimes the tree stumps are important. But all that could be put up on this easy-to-use, user-friendly interface that doesn't require anyone with, if you know how to use the web, you can access the information. So we're almost there. The headstone survey's been started. As soon as we get in a break in the weather, we'll finish that. And then hopefully, it'll probably be early summer, we'll wait for things to dry out. And, or maybe midsummer, we'll do the EMI, and we'll try and see what's beneath the surface. And hopefully, bring to light, maybe it'll corroborate with your divining rod data. And we'll see, well, no, a lot of times it does. And I don't know, we'll see where it goes from there. I think that's all I've got on this short of the, no, this is what I was going to show you with the, this is a sample, and we did this for Roselawn too, where we've got spaces within lots, and you can come in here, conceptual design. We don't have this at Parker per se, but you'd be able to click on a space and pull up a list of information from the Sexton's card file, from a number of other repositories that are on record. This is from Heron, but just a sample of what the online interface simplified looks like. And we continue the project. Any questions? Yes?
Has there been any correlation done between divining rods and like CPR?
I've seen some good witching and I've seen some bad witching. And by no means am I making a mockery of it. As a scientist, well, I'm a scientist. Well, I'm not to say that it'd be interesting to compare some of these. Sexton Cravens, or Jumbo as he's known, sold most of these spaces out here that were empty, and claimed that he did this, and if he found that the graves were clear, he sold Heronites their spaces. We came in and found that among all of the purportedly unoccupied sold spaces within this entire block here, 67% of them had bodies in them. And so if you were buying a space or spaces for your family, chances are that you'd have a partner for life if you bought it in the city of Heron. But yeah, so you know, the state wasn't real happy when we wrote the report and had to tell them that they, aside from the bad record keeping, it was the sexton witching the graves, and if they were clear, you'd sell them. I don't know. But yes, ma'am.
What about gravestones that are just under the surface?
Ah,
or sandstone
yeah.
or something?
Yeah, a lot of that, and those will show up. Well, it depends on what we're looking for. We can tune our instruments to look, you know, say 0 to 6 inches or 12 inches, and sometimes usually we're interested in what's beyond that. In our excavations here, actually, we came across quite a few buried heads, and that's not, if you've got a marker, especially a flat marker, not always the best idea, because sometimes they get grassed over and start to get you get water moving across some of them and whatnot, and carrying materials, and eventually, if they get lost, you know, that's it. But
Is there sandstone or shale and they start to disintegrate then? And there's I'm saying, what do you do? That blading? Or
Oh. Well, the blading, there were no markers left in the cemetery that I mentioned that we actually bladed. Because, yeah, you don't want to tear up any existing headstones and things like that.
No.
In the campground cemetery, we would take probes, you know, or a wood probe, and you could literally probe the surface until you hit something. So,
Kind of cake like that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of our instrumentation would show that up, show where those are.
Late in the summer, you'll see oftentimes dead grass.
Yep.
There's a flat stone just underneath it.
Yeah, we found several,
Bunch of those now.
in this area in Block 41, we found several unmarked graves just by patterns. And see, once you disturb the ground, it's never quite the same. And so the porosity of that, the permeability of the soils and the substrate change. And so the stuff that grows at the surface might grow a little bit different than the surrounding vegetation. Usually it'll have a nice outline on it. And so you can use the vegetative patterns to look for some of that as well. Yes?
Are you fairly certain that there is no overburial at Parker?
No, but I'd have no reason to believe there'd be any reason for it.
Your color patterns, it didn't look like.
Well, we haven't done the EMI out there yet. That's a study we'll end up doing this summer. But you know, the subsurface methods, it's like an archaeologist who we work with always says, forget the geophysics, dig. And so when you look at, and you saw some of those colored patterns and whatnot, it's all about anomalies and trying to interpret them as a geophysicist or a geologist. And, sometimes it's not always perfect. In fact, GPR at the Heron City Cemetery, due to the high clay content of the soils and the high moisture content and the high water table, noisy, just didn't really give us anything. Parker, I don't know, you're up on the mound there. Of course, we're not doing GPR, we're doing EMI. But I don't know, we'll see. But I think it would be very difficult to see overburials. And I don't think it would, I don't know, it's not the type of environment or type of a cemetery where I would expect that. In the Potter's Field at the Heron City Cemetery, the later sexton was intentionally doing that, although he was doing it with a backhoe. So he'd open the grave, crush the contents, and then in you'd go. The earlier sextons were also doing burials, but it was a potter's field. It's where the indigent, the unknown, the unidentified, the paupers went. And if you were hand digging it and you know, you came down to a wood vault, you're not going to smash it down with your shovel. You might just kind of be like, well, you know, pauper on pauper, and then cover it up. But is that really disturbing the grave? Not really, you know, especially if it was someone unknown or someone found dead around the county, like common. Yes?
Were you there or with Carolyn when they did the partial excavation right there in the middle and found the fist-sized stones and the layer?
I was, yeah. Yeah, I was paying more attention to my students and the work at hand, but yeah, I do recall them coming across, and they had came across a fairly good-sized erratic, some nice glacial striations. Your Wisconsin rock you mentioned.
Yeah, that's where I got that from. I wasn't sure.
You might be able to push it beyond that.
Machine pick that up. How did they just decided to discover there? Or
Well, they found that excavating. That would show up as an object. That thing was large enough, yeah, but yeah, it came somewhere off the Canadian Shield or something, who knows. But
That began shortly as my granddaughter found a little rock in the middle, and she asked Carolyn about it. So Carolyn just thought, well, maybe it's just a flat rock or another. And Carolyn just kept digging around the rock, maybe this far, and the rock became this deep, and right at the base of the rock had these other rocks around it, and not in a kind of a pattern. So that's how that came about.
I guess my question would be that how would before digging down and making a mess or breaking or doing whatever, I don't think anybody's done anything wrong with it, but how would your machine prevent that by saying, well, wait a second, you're in the wrong spot.
oh, in terms of finding objects beneath the surface? Well, part of employing, yeah, I think I understand what you're asking. Part of the employment of the technology is to not disturb the substrate and to look for potentially buried markers and certainly, people. Large objects, the GPR technology is largely going to be, it's going to be best in areas where you have large void spaces. Something like this where you've got, these people aren't buried in concrete vaults, they're in wood boxes and thing, but what happens is over time, the materials, the box screws and the nails that hold those wood boxes together, they're ferrous, right? They rust out. The whole structural integrity of those boxes is going to be compromised, and then the whole mess just kind of falls in. And oftentimes, if we're actually doing archaeological excavations, we'll find wood from wooden boxes and from coffins that are pretty good shape structurally, but in terms of the wood's integrity. But structurally, the whole mess is always collapsed down because it just gives way. So there's no void space. And then you just get a bunch of background noise from the GPR, especially in the Heron Spotter's Field, which is just so dug up. But anyway, so the EMI, I don't know, it'll be a surprise. Like I said, it's a work in progress. We'll hope for the best, and if we can employ other methods, we'll employ other methods as well.
One problem with the Parker is you have a big iron fence
Yes.
around the periphery, so that's going to mess with the EMI.
Yeah.
And then if you have large metallic or radix collision hole, that's going to, these here, that's limestone or marble, so that won't mess with the instrument as much as a granite.
That was then my question to you guys.
Yeah, exactly. We had that discussion just a few weeks ago.
A cemetery is such a thing to maintain, especially around the perimeter. I wanted to take out the old farm fence.
Mm-hmm.
Leave the post for now.
Sure.
And I wasn't clear, will that really disrupt your work to take out the farm fence itself?
No, better gone than there, but you'll find once we do the EMI, it'll be pinging all over the place. I mean, you have small bits of barbed wire or something under the ground.
I
It'll
want to get that this spring.
yeah. You won't get everything, I guarantee you. We'll find a lot of it on the radar.
Oh, it's still 5 degrees out, but, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
What is a grave halo?
Ah, I did leave that behind. So one of the things that we can do to, not in every case, but if the soils are right, you've got this pine box, right, that someone might go into. And of course you dig the hole, you put that box in the hole. And as groundwater infiltrates the wooden box, or as effective precipitation percolating through the soil substrate comes around that box, piney woods, and you see this in coniferous forests in terms of soil structure, you have what we call a zone of alluviation. It's a, if you've ever dug in this area, the soils in Illinois are largely what we call mollisols, and they're variable. They've got different types of clays, grays and browns and things like that. But in cases where you have brownish clays, that brown color is due to the iron oxide coatings of certain minerals around the grains within that clay fabric. Things like guthite and hematite and limonite, and they give them that color. Well, as these fluids percolate around this wooden object, organic acids from a decaying body are one source of some of the acids, but also from the woods themselves. These inorganic acids will percolate through those soils and will leach the iron oxides, the color, out of the clay. And so you've got this wood box, and more often than not, if the soil conditions are right, you'll have these nice gray clays. They're natural, well, they're not natural, they're thrown back in there, but the gray clays will surround or engulf the wooden box. And so we'll core, and usually maybe we'll probe and we'll know where the box is, but we'll take a soil core and we'll pull up every 12 inches, and we'll lay it out, and we'll pull another 12 until we get down to something. And what we look for is this abrupt change from browns to grays that are sometimes, but not always, indicative of this grave halo. And if we go a little further and we start to feel something, we've got a special bit, and we'll sink it just a little bit, and we'll pull it up, and we'll find wood fragments out there. In fact, there's some in the glass case from some of the heron massacre victims here in the library. It's okay, it's just wood. But anyway, so that's what the grave halo is. And when you're blading down close to it, you'll get a perfect square that is plain as day. And what we'll do is before we go instead of going any further, we'll flag it. And then some students or myself will come back and we'll map those corners using that precision technology. We'll cover it all up, because if we didn't map it, what good would be finding, right? So you map the corners with precision, and then you can cover it all back up, make a map, and then you can come back and put a headstone in the exact location where it should be, and you have a permanent record of precisely where that person is buried. Not only that, in the Strand Cemetery, there were several children and several adolescents. We could, to some extent, map out the sizes of these and differentiate between children's graves and adult graves simply by mapping the grave halos, right? So.
That last slide or picture you had there that showed the west field.
This?
Where is the cemetery related in that west field area?
Oh, on the online looking one? In this? Yeah, I don't know. Somewhere down here, right?
Where is
I just took a quick screenshot of the thing. I thought I was in the right spot, but I may not be zoomed out enough.
Right there.
It should be on a mound.
Yeah, it's right here.
That's right towards the middle.
There you have it. What you should see on here is you should see our points that we've mapped in a little smaller, but it's not online, so it didn't
You
pull up.
have the one that's the big overview, shows the road up above it and the terrains.
Mhm.
Could you bring that back just? for a
Sure.
moment?
Let's see.
It looked more like a Google.
Yeah, yeah. That was the control map, I think, that I threw up there. This one here.
Okay. The road up above at the top, that's
Yep.
Road 2000.
Mm-hmm.
It's just south of Westfield. And, because this shows the old road. Right here, used to come in on the south of Mr. Nixon's property. And there's
Ties
this,
into that
this
embankment.
dam you talked about. They supposedly have had some elevated areas there, but it was always muddy. You
Sure.
couldn't get through. Maybe wagons, but you can't with cars. They moved it up here, and you can see, and I've got 1995, 2005, where the lane was still there. But it's all plowed now. Don't try it.
Sure.
You might get to right now because it's frozen, but up here, at the very top, you see just a little bit of gravel. Come over the hill, and there's a little 5, 8, 10 foot of gravel. That's the lane parallels the irrigation ditch. Not irrigation ditch, drainage ditch. Travel along through there, you make a little jog, about 30 feet, you come up to here, and right there's where our tractor was sitting in that one picture. You got 500 feet between two fields. And if it's muddy in your yard, you're gonna sink in a car. Carolyn got stuck twice in a 2 or 3 week period. And it sat overnight one time because they couldn't get to it. Gotta have a long, long steel cable to hold it. Last time I was over there, my 4-wheel drive just barely moved. I traveled a lot of it sideways. And part of the problem is that it's like this. You're trying to avoid some of the ruts, and you get to sliding, and you finally get out of it, so it's difficult. Thanks.
Sure.
Appreciate what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. Collaborative. So we'll end our survey sometime by the end of the summer in terms of all the data acquisition and whatnot, and hopefully we'll get it to you folks and you post it somewhere where these folks can see it.
We'll try to get back into that Excel file, finish that.
Ah,
many holes
sure.
in there, too.
Absolutely.
And is the EMI that you're gonna do,
EMI. Mhm.
Is that as effective as the ground penetrating?
It depends on what it is you're looking for, how deep it is, and the type of substrate beneath it. Our faculty partnership grant only allows a certain amount of funds, and so EMI fits nicely into that fund. GPR is fairly expensive, so.
Yeah.
But not that we couldn't do it in a future run. So we'll hope for the best. Well, thank you very much.
That ground that lies to the south of the cemetery, that large field where all the little oil tracks are at, that's Parker Prairie?
Well, that's all Parker Prairie. Parker Prairie extends, I don't know, a long ways, what they originally called Parker Prairie. And the woods up in the corner of that intersection, I think it's 1240 East, goes by other names too, but 2000 Road. That's kind of high right there. That was the top of that moraine, and then that's where George David built a cabin. And it kind of sweeps to the south. It's, they were from Kentucky and Ohio and all that hilly stuff, and they're farmers. They over here in 1812, and look at this flat ground, So,
Well, I know if you go south far enough, you run into Parker Township.
yes, that's all, yeah. And those were all named through that. At that time, it was Clark County, you know, originally Crawford County, then Clark County, and then in 1830, Coles County took that to round out. And that's where a lot of confusion comes into all of our histories, you know, like James talked about Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.